everyone. Welcome to the second and final episode for 2025. We will be kicking off with another one in February after everyone's had a little bit of a break in January. So we wanted to just jump on and really kind of talk through a few themes. Obviously, it's been a really big year for HR, and I think most of you will probably feel a little bit exhausted and really looking forward to the end of this year. If you aren't getting a break, I can imagine our friends in retail probably aren't, so sorry about that. So look, really, I think the biggest thing that kind of stuck out in 2025 is that HR teams have really probably hit their limit. And what I mean by that is that organisations have really been underinvesting in HR function probably for about 2 years now. I think we're coming up. I mean, it was around pretty late 2023 that we really organisations starting to really kind of trim their headcount, and literally it feels like we've been in an endless cycle of restructuring, doing org design, removing roles out of structures. So I feel like probably 2026 is going to be a period where we will probably move into slight recovery of that, and I think what that's going to look like will play out differently in certain areas. So I don't think it'll be a surprise to any of you, whether you're in Queensland or Western Australia or Victoria, everyone's been in the same boat, and I've just having numerous conversations with senior leaders across all levels, and everyone is just like, look, the workforce is tired, we're tired, it's been a lot. So there's been very high expectations on HR. It feels like HR is, not only looking after everything from a life cycle perspective, they're also being really kind of fast around AI, and that's sort of falling in their remit. So they're really what that has rather had to deal with. So I think, it's been a tough year because transformation has been thrown in as well. So as much as organisations have had to deal with the restructuring, the constant questions from the board around risk and compliance, there's also been a lot of work that's been done around transformation. So a lot of things around data stuff. So that's been really, really tough. And it's not something that HR necessarily leans into. People don't join a people function to be doing risk compliance, payroll, wage remediation. They want to do it so they can really kind of shift the dial around things like culture and capability and leadership. So if you haven't been enjoying your job in HR, you are certainly not alone. That's what I would probably say. So I'm really hoping in 26 we start to see a little bit of shift around that. I think what's been happening probably from a job perspective, how the job market has been playing out. You can afford to be picky on a job search and moving, and at the executive level do know that. There just hasn't been the opportunities in the market that we would normally like to see. Yes, there's been hiring across government and healthcare and then some of those sectors, but the reality is we have not seen the full market offering opportunities. The people that were in roles really just kind of sitting there. Very busy around the junior and the mid-levels of the market, and you would have seen that across the market. There's opportunities abounding at that sort of level. So what's 2026 going to look like? Very good question. But before I jump onto that, if everyone can just pop their questions into the chat beforehand while you think of them, just drop them in because that's really helpful for me when we get to the middle of this session to have those questions ready, and I can just pop through and answer them as they come through. So I'm really just here to answer any questions. If you want the crystal ball on 2026, if you want to know what's happening in a certain skill set or a particular stage in terms of what's going on, please just pop those questions in there if that makes sense. So I think, moving forward and moving into 2026, there's a couple of things that are probably going to play out. To my point earlier, HR has had to do everything plus the kitchen sink on a pretty lean budget, mostly, if that makes sense. That's a generalisation. Some people have still got massive functions, and congratulations, that's great for them, but most people have been running pretty thin. So I think moving forward, it's become pretty clear that organisations have underinvested, and we've seen it across the board. This time of year is a spike in resignations, and I'm sure probably if you're working, you're probably feeling those resignations coming thick and fast. Some of that is your typical rage quit that happens this time of year, but I think people are also like, I just don't feel valued. I'm feeling like a number. I'm done. So there's a little bit of that. It definitely giving a little bit of a, I suppose, a pandemic kind of vibe, if that makes sense. So I feel like sort of towards the end of the pandemic, we all kind of went back to normality. There was a lot of people who were just like, I'm done. I've done 2-3 years of this. I'm done. So sometimes there is a little bit of a, I guess there's just a limit, if that makes sense. People just do naturally reach their limit and they're like, I'm done. I need something different in the new year. So where things are probably going to sit, I think the biggest issue moving forward, or the biggest thing that organisations are going to have to deal with, is going to be capability, 110%. And when I talk about capability, I'm talking about what that for perspective. So I think there's absolutely going to be more organisations leaning true org design, not org design for org design's sake or doing it for a restructure and removing headcount. It's really going to be around, what does our workforce look like in a very different world and a very different future? AI, as we all know, is coming thick and fast, and we need to look at how that's going to play out, how that's going to impact, what is that going to mean for your operating model. I think HR is absolutely going to be at the forefront of this. I think it's going to be asked to and expected to really lead that conversation around productivity, around skills, the impact of AI, and also that operating model effectiveness. So, you know, are we having the most effective model and operating kind of, you know, model for the business? Does this make sense? And that's going to come across every function of an organisation. It's going to be sales, it's going to be, you know, marketing, it's going to be IT ops, you know, whatever it is in your organisation. I think that's going to be massive, because we know that the skills that a business has right now in terms of their employees, they're going to change, and the demands of that organisation in terms of the demands from the customer is going to change. It's going to keep changing. And I think this is something I'm really passionate about HR doing. Keep yourself up to date. You have to. Things are going to shift and change. So if you don't understand what true org design is, go and look it up. Like, you know, there's plenty of opportunities to just upskill yourself. It doesn't need to be postgraduate or anything like that. You want to just go in and actually get some really good content and knowledge, and then try and apply that, because, you know, we're entering a very different world. It is, you know, the Industrial Revolution 2.0. It's affecting knowledge workers. This is all very different. So, you know, we're facing a future where we might have employees that are agents as well as actual humans. That's going to require a completely different skill set and a different mentality of how HR approaches that, if that makes sense. So there's going to be a, you know, just so much change coming. So, you know, I think that big AI question is going to force a lot of maturity for organisations, and they're going to have to really kind of focus on that in terms of, someone's just told me that I need to hold my mic because I think it's not coming through. Sorry, guys, I hope you heard some of that. I think the AI question is really going to force a lot of introspective around what that's going to mean for the organisation. And I think what we've seen to date is a lot of organisations have just gone, oh, fantastic, AI is going to just, you know, save me all these costs in labour, you know, in terms of, you know, my labour costs. And just really have kind of, you know, basically executed that without actually thinking through how that's going to work. And we've seen that fail miserably in plenty of instances and cases. So I think probably in 2026, organisations are going to go, okay, before we, you know, bite the bullet in terms of getting some headcount removed, we're actually going to look at role structure, role clarity. What is this role actually doing? Where does it fit into the organisation? That might mean that, you know, in terms of workforce planning, roles might sit in a completely different area to where they maybe have sat in the past. So that's going to be really, really interesting. And I think that's where HR is going to be expected to contribute to the conversation in a really meaningful way. So, you know, again, expanding on that, I think for HR, you know, if you're a transactional operational operator, there is not going to be room for you in the future. You need to be looking at things with a commercial and a strategic lens. You need to get really comfortable with data. You need to get really comfortable with storytelling. So what is the data telling me? How do I make that business case? Do some research, get some, you know, real world examples examples, liaise with your peers, talk to people outside of organizations, industry, network. There's so much, information out there. Information is just so democratized these days. There's just so much stuff at our fingertips that you can use real life examples around, trying to get, perhaps, some investment for a particular system or tool or whatever it might be, and able to demonstrate that measurable impact. Our business here at Samuels Donegan, we have recently just gone to a brand new CRM for us, and the software, it's just incredible what it's able to achieve. Things that in years gone by would have been an absolute pipe dream. And it's just about constantly going, okay, how can we do things a little bit better? You don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you really need to be looking at how you can just, dial up a little bit around that stuff. So I'd encourage you to do that in your career as well. I think what we're probably going to see in terms of options, or in terms of roles rather, in terms of what's going to happen in 2026, I think from a hiring perspective, I think the mid, senior, and probably the executive market will really start moving in with Q3 and Q4. So we're talking obviously financial years here. So we're sort of talking like, February, March, April, etc. A lot of senior people, they're not just going to move for anything. So if you are hiring in that executive space, you need to be really clear around what you want this person to come in to achieve. People are not going to just take a role. It's a really lean organisation. They've got no budget. The role has been downsized from a salary perspective, which we've seen happen multiple times in the more recent market of the last couple of years. People are really going to want to know that the executive is on board and the board in terms of what you're trying to achieve. There are some fabulous operators out there, but they are really going to hold their value in and not going to take anything, if that makes sense. So that's going to, I think, be quite critical in terms of moving forward. I think the biggest challenge for organisations moving forward, and you would know this if you deal with an exec, it's really going to be leadership. It's getting leadership to understand that the world is changing, and I think at the exec end, that's a really difficult conversation to have. And I often sort of talk about HR. Your job is all about difficult conversations. That's exactly what HR has to do. Sometimes they're happy conversations, sometimes they're not. But a lot of the time, it is really about trying to influence, the exec to understand things. What does that mean for their organisation? What does it mean for their people? In the next probably 5 years, we're going to see a really interesting, I guess, trajectory in terms of a lot of those, senior execs are probably going to be moving out of the workforce. So we're going to see, I think, I can't remember the data off the top of my head, but millennials, which is kind of that, I think it's the 30 to 40 year age group, they're suddenly going to become the biggest population in leadership roles. So, if you're not already thinking about your succession planning, which you probably should have been thinking about 5 years ago, you really need to look at that, and you really need to make sure that you're getting leaders that are stepping into those, step change roles, or those roles that are one removed from the C-suite. You really need to make sure that that capability is there, and really make sure that they are ready to lead. Again, we always see the, brilliant operator that gets promoted because they're technically capable, but literally have no idea about leading people. That still happens, unfortunately. And I think the difference is you can see when organisations have a really magnetic leader who really, really connects with the people, they're incredibly successful. Incredibly well, leaning into that, leaning into knowing the people and having that kind of, that real sort of focus on people is going to be something that's going to set you apart. And I think moving forward, I think it's the organisations that are really investing in those sorts of areas and doing more than just survival mode. Like, you can't do business in 2026 with, an HR function from like 1990. It's just not going to work. You're going to get so left behind. So if you do need to, have something to influence your exec around getting some sort of, spend or budget approved, I think you can absolutely leverage some of those areas. Just a reminder, we've got about 20 minutes to go, so I'm going to jump into questions probably in the next sort of 3 to 5 minutes, if that makes sense. So pop them through. I think we've already got a few coming through, so I might actually just start, because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to, yep, there's quite a few already. So I'm going to jump in and start asking a few. What capability do you think will separate good senior leaders from great ones? Yeah, good question. And I bang on this a lot. So really it's the commercial capability. And, we interview people day in, day out, and you can spot the superstars a mile away. They always give excellent organisational context. They don't talk about what HR is doing. They talk about why the business is doing things and what their role is in that. So they very much are thinking of themselves as a business partner. That's the key term. Really being able to talk about the commercials and being able to talk about the metrics and the ROI and how they've been able to shift those levers and those metrics. So being able to talk about outcomes and being super commercial, that's just something, and really being strategic. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, I want to be strategic. They really don't understand what that means. So really, really having an excellent handle on what that means. And you need to be able to sell. You need to be able to articulate what that looks like and be able to tell that story. So that's absolutely essential. CVs. Okay, got a question here saying, do you think organisations will start reinvesting in their CEOs, Centres of Excellence, rather, in 2026, particularly across L&OD and talent after so much tightening in 24-25? Really good question. I think the jury is probably a little out on that. We know that certain functions are a little bit of, I guess, fair weather friends. And unfortunately, talent acquisition, learning and development, organisational design, they're often put in the nice to have bucket. Now, that's not a great strategy because when you need them, it's probably too late to start investing. So, you know, the organisations that haven't cut those functions are definitely going to step into the recovery a lot quicker. So I would like to think that organisations are going to revamp that space. I think in some of the CVs, the roles are going to look a little bit different. I think things like, you know, people analytics and talent intelligence are definitely going to be areas that are going to grow. I think if you're a transactional recruiter and you're just doing volume, I'd be a bit worried because I would definitely think that AI would be coming for your role. But if you can do much more than that and be that workforce planning expert or really kind of, you know, great with the data and, you know, all that kind of stuff and blending into kind of what talent, you know, high potential talent programs look like, that type of thing, then really make yourself that multidisciplinary expert. Absolutely. I do think we're going to see an uplift in OD. I think traditional learning, I think, unfortunately, that's AI is probably going to have a massive impact. So I don't know that we're going to see so much growth in the learning, the pure kind of learning space. I think AI governance, that's definitely going to be a role that's going to come in the future, and that's probably going to fall under HR, to be honest, because if you think about sort of like the, I guess the challenges that are going to come from a privacy perspective, that's certainly going to be something that is definitely going to I suspect see some demand. Just going to scroll up so I can see a few more questions here. We've got sorry, that's not moving for me. So, sorry, just getting the feedback about the muffle. Sorry about that, guys. What are the qualifications and skills employers are prioritising for the junior mid level? So I think, look, really interesting. Qualifications is a great question, rather. Again, don't know the answer to this, to be honest, and I really feel for those that have, you know, come out with their degree and they're ready to roll kind of thing. I don't know how much value those sorts of credentials are going to hold in the future, and I know that's going to be something that people don't want to hear if they've just done a master's or rolled for something. I think on the tools experience is absolutely going to be worth more. Anyone knows who, you know, has come out of university and you've got your certificate and you're all ready to kind of roll, you know, theory doesn't mean much without execution and practical experience. So I think micro-learning is a really fabulous kind of approach. If people can just do those micro-learning and those modules and just do upskilling, I think that's definitely going to be something that's worthwhile. And I think you can do that across all levels. So I definitely think that's something maybe to focus on from that side of things. Sorry, I have to scroll up here. Yeah, good question. Yes, recruitment fun and games. So most candidates are using AI to adapt their CV to ensure it passes the ATS. This impacts quality candidates missing out on the shortlist. What advice would you give to mitigate this? Yeah, great question. It's really tough at the moment because unfortunately what is happening is organisations are, you know, they're all getting inundated. I caught up with a client yesterday. He was chatting to the CPO. I was asking them how they were going with the role that they had advertised directly. She said, I've had a couple of hundred applicants and it's just been advertised for the last week or so. That's very typical of what's going on. Now, that's not to say that she's getting 200 quality applicants, because the issue is a lot of people are utilising ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it might be, to create a fabulous CV that when it comes to interview time, and exactly the organisation said that, they said, oh, we got to interview, candidates, they couldn't talk to their experience, even though they had a fantastic CV. That is a real challenge, and it's absolutely a reality. And I talk to people all day long who have had this experience. The best advice I can give you is, you need to compete on the same playing field, right? You need to have tailored CVs for specific roles, and you need to ensure that it is optimized from an SEO perspective. You can jump on our website. We've got some fabulous resources there in terms of the job seeker section that will help you in terms of making sure that your CV is really kind of, appropriate, because as again, I say to people all the time, you need to realize that when you're applying for a role, AI is going to be the first screening point. Do you know what I mean? It literally is. That's the way things are working these days. So you need to be able to make sure that you're absolutely, ensuring that you're at least on an equal playing field with everybody else. I've got, how is AI impacting HR roles, and do you think it'll change in 2026? Yeah, look, AI obviously a massive question, and I've kind of spoken to that a little bit. I think it will shift and change. I think, anything that's repetitive, that's really cyclical, I think that's going to be a positive for HR, because HR does have so much admin. Do you know what I mean? If we can remove some of that admin without compromising quality, absolutely. Look, unfortunately, that is probably going to mean that there will be reductions in roles, and we're sort of starting to see that a little bit in some of those entry-level roles where it is quite binary. It's that, the advice line, all that kind of stuff. That's just a reality. That happens, at the end of the day, ideally that's bringing up HR to do some more value add kind of things, which we would obviously hope from that side of things. 10 minutes to go, so I'm just going to jump in and see what other questions we had. Just scrolling as we go. Here we go. One. Okay. Yeah, good question. Are there any particular sectors you think will be looking to build their OD or change capability? Look, I definitely think that's a little sector-led. So if we look at where there are major skills shortages, that's absolutely going to be key. So it's going to be healthcare, massive capital-intensive workforce. So there's huge amounts of change and capability required in those areas. Infrastructure, again, so if you think about, even from a domestic housing, perspective, we're supposed to build, 1 million homes in the next 2 years or something ridiculous like that. We need the workforce to be able to do that. And where there's a massive skills shortages, Queensland's got the Olympics that they're, gearing up for. There's huge amounts of construction happening in things like wind farms and solar farms and things like that. So again, anything where we're seeing that definite skills shortage, we absolutely will see that change, and probably that OD kind of capability uplift from that side of things. Salary expectations. Okay, good question. Always a hot topic. From a market perspective, how are salary expectations and hiring confidence shifting? So I do think, salaries are probably going to hold. I don't think we're going to see any kind of, great rise, if that makes sense. Things have evened out since the great post-COVID, sort of boom, if that makes sense. Again, it's simple economics. It's going to play out in supply and demand. If there's too many people, then that will bring the price down. So, things like talent acquisition, that is always dictated by supply and demand. At the moment, we really haven't seen any rise in salaries. And if you jump on and have a look at our lowdown and national salary guide, you'll be able to look at this specifically. Employee relations, workplace relations, industrial relations, those guys can name their price, right? They are the most in-demand skill set nationwide. Now, that is because they have a skill that everybody wants. And those particular practitioners are a very, very tiny pool, probably only 5% of the total HR market is made up of experts in that area. That is why the law firms are doing so well at the moment. So absolutely seeing growth in that space. I think people that can do talent analytics and intelligence, that's definitely going to be a growth area. So I suspect we'll see some growth in there, but I really can't see. I think, look, ideally, I'd like to see some exec roles come back online in terms of where they should be positioned. That's probably more hopeful than an actual certainty, but we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. Okay, someone's just asking me any advice for those wanting to break into the HR space and how they can go about identifying organisations that will provide them with the opportunity to grow through mentorship. So yeah, if you're wanting to break into HR, look, it's always been hard. It's been hard for 25 years. Hard when I did it. The reality is sometimes you've got to start in a role that is not your dream role. Regardless of whether you're a graduate or not, you've got to just literally get in there and prove your worth. And look, it might be doing a contract role. It might be starting in a recruitment team, even though you don't really want to do that. I think the biggest thing is actually just getting some of those practical tools. There's lots of great networking events as well you can go to. There's RE membership, all that kind of stuff. There's some amazing stuff on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, PE, that's interesting. Yeah, so PE question there. How is the scene evolving with the PE-backed tech scale-ups? Tech's an interesting one. So, I always say to people, hold on to your hat if you're going to work in tech, because as much as they might love you, they will happily let you go. I think really here in Australia at the moment, the PE market is really booming, but it is not just in technology. 5 years ago, absolutely, all of the tech firms would have been, VC, backed and private equity backed. But these days, really, private equity is growing in huge numbers. It's partly to do with the fact that, private credit makes life a little bit easier. And what I mean by that is if you're a listed company, you constantly have to disclose to the market every quarter. You've got to keep the shareholders happy. You've got to keep, the regulators happy, etc. There's a lot to kind of keep in play. And HR doesn't, you can't measure results in HR every quarter. That's really, really difficult. It's very, very difficult to be able to measure those, and be articulate. And then, if you don't make budget, then you're constantly having to find those costs somewhere else. So the reason PE has actually been quite attractive is that it gives you a chance to actually be able to make those kind of long-term plays, etc. Because culture, strategy, execution, that doesn't shift overnight. You need years for that stuff to embed. So where we're seeing at the moment a lot of private equity is coming across the board. So it could be in infrastructure, transport, logistics, it's in healthcare. It is across the board. And if you do have PA experience, you will absolutely be highly sought after because it is a different operating model. It is an absolute different operating model, and it's something it's super commercial still, but it is definitely a different kind of and a unique kind of, setup. So I always say to people, get as much experience as you can. Don't just get PE, go and get privately listed, go and get public. The reality is over your career, there are going to be multiple things that shift and change. Organizations that, used to be 20 years ago, everyone wanted to work with, they don't want to work with them. Sectors changed, you know what I mean? So I think that's really important to make sure that you're getting a lot of diversity in your experience as well as across your career. I got, I think, 3 minutes to go, so I'll just quickly see if there's any other I can answer. Here we go. Someone is asking, sorry. Yeah, someone's just asked about future of work. So, yeah, great insight. Yeah, really agree with the AI. Yep. I think HR will also be adding roles to AI CV. Yeah, okay. What else do you think will be added? It's a really good point. I think some of the COEs rather might actually shift and change, and we might actually see some stuff that actually, comes out. Like literally, I don't know, like learning might be something that's completely, sorry, there's a flying here. Can you tell it's hot today? We might find that there are new things going on. Like, DNI used to be a centre of excellence. Sadly, it's not anymore. Do you know what I mean? I hope that comes back online, but it might be replaced by something else. So it could be, tech enablement might actually sit under, HR. Like we know now that organisations are kind of like, you can't have your comms and change team sitting over there. They really need to sit with HR because they're, it's people impact, all those sorts of things. So I think, again, to that point of org design, we're going to see a lot of different things happen. I think, we're also witnessing at the moment with the new laws coming out in terms of psychosocial. I've spoken to numerous organisations where all of a sudden safety is now sitting under HR because it's not purely just a blue collar issue anymore. So that's starting to shift and change. We've also seen payroll come under HR as well, which I don't think anyone's excited about. But again, when you've got wage compliance that HR are, basically accountable for, you're getting all these things shift and change. So I think, things are going to shift faster. They're going to shift faster. I think 2026 would be hopefully a good year. I do think we're going to see a little bit more of that confidence return to the market. The economic data is already showing that. Interest rates are holding firm. That's actually a good thing because it means the economy is working as it is supposed to. So all things, I suppose, crossed moving into 2026. I hope everyone's enjoyed this. Thank you for attending and thank you for your questions. I know there's a ton more. I just can't get to them all, but definitely save them up for the next session, which is going to be on February the 6th at 12 p.m. You'll be able to rewatch this if you've registered. So again, have a lovely holiday season. I hope you all get a decent break and come back refreshed in 2026. Thanks so much for joining, everyone.